Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. A lot of Russians were not expecting the war to come back to them. Even now, only a small number of people in Russia really truly understand what is the scale of the war that they have started and what damage it is causing. Putin's regime has done a pretty good job at trying to cover up the effects of this war on Russian population, yet even with his efforts, it is not enough. And now Russians are truly finding themselves sliding back into the Soviet Union style situation. Let's talk about this and other news from and around Ukraine in today's Ukraine Daily News Show. Let us begin. Focus is writing about Russians sliding to the 1991 style economic collapse. Its citizens are being prepared for another financial blow, as State Duma Deputy Nikolai Arefiev said that due to the budget deficits, authorities are looking of new sources of replenishment of the state treasury, and these steps will inevitably affect the wallets of ordinary Russians. According to him, the current economic policy boils down to shifting the burden of costs onto the population. The government is already considering introduction of new fees, taxes, and commissions. In particular, we are talking about the possible introduction of a fee for service bank cards and a revision of a value-added tax rate. Note that the value-added tax rate has already been revised and accepted at a higher rate, a 22% VAT. This is not a direct calculations style tax because VAT goes into everything, and the effects on the costs for population are not just going to be estimated to be 2%, they're estimated to be much higher due to the compound effect of this prevailing tax. 40% Russians already spend most of their income on basic needs, food, utilities, and transport. New tax initiatives can lead to increased social tensions, especially in regions with low salaries. The Russian government is effectively admitting that the budget is short on resources. And this is true because the only way Russia was able to sustain their current development and economic growth so far is they took the money that they saved up from super profits that they were receiving from Europe in the years coming to the 2022, and now they spend them all trying to sustain their economy and grow investments into the military-industrial complex. The piggy bank right now is pretty much empty. Therefore, to fill this hole, they will shift this burden to regular Russians, which finally will make Russians feel the effects of this war on their own pocket and livelihood. Leading expert in the National Institute for Strategic Studies, Ivan Us, explains to Focus that even according to official figures, the Russian Federation's deficit budget exceeds the planned figures, yes, by a lot. And gas coupons that Russia has introduced right now due to the Ukrainian strikes is only the first bells of the looming crisis. Fuel coupons have already appeared in several regions of Russia, in a country called the gas station of the world. This is a signal. Even basic goods are becoming scarce. As the expert explains, if Russians start withdrawing money from their accounts en masse, the system may not be able to withstand it. In that case, the authorities will likely impose restrictions on cash issuance under the pretext of protecting banking stability. Quote, Russia has found it safe in a classic economic zugzwang. No matter which option these authorities choose, they all lead to losses. If you lower the rate, inflation will increase. If you raise it, the economy will freeze. They have driven themselves into a dead end. In every decision, now there is only the difference between the worst and even worst option, Us continues. Previously, Moscow always declared, it's difficult now, but it will be better in a year. However, the new budget destroyed even this optimism. A deficit is planned for all years until 2028. Moreover, in the 2026 budget, spending on servicing the state debt exceeds funding for education and medicine, and this is the main sign of systematic crisis. Surprisingly, Belarus is seeking talks with Kyiv amid efforts to break Western isolation. The head of Belarus State Security Committee, Ivan Tertel, claimed on October 19 that his agency is prepared to engage in dialogue with Kyiv to find a consensus to end Ukraine's war with Russia, Belarusian state media reports. Our president and dictator Alexander Lukashenko works as much as possible in order to stabilize the situation in the region, and we've managed to balance interests of the parties in this extremely complicated situation with a tendency towards escalation, Tertel said on Belarus One State TV. I'm convinced that only via quiet, calm negotiations, by looking for a compromise, we will be able to resolve the situations. The security chief continued, adding that a lot depends on the Ukrainian side. And I just want to say that this is an absolute non-starter. Belarus is a puppet state of Russia. It's just a continuation of the fluff around the possible negotiations to end the war, specifically targeting US administration, because in recent talk, there was contact with Lukashenko and his regime representatives and US representatives, and they were able to, quote-unquote, negotiate the release of some political prisoners, and this warmed up the relationship between the two countries. Now, it seems that Putin's regime wants to use Lukashenko to muddy the waters even more, to put us into some kind of a, quote-unquote, negotiating track, which is a absolute joke. And talking about negotiations, Trump's second meeting with Putin seems to be off. The White House said Tuesday that the planned meeting in Budapest, announced by Donald Trump just last week after his 2-hour phone call with Putin, was no longer in the works after Secretary of State Mark Rubio spoke Monday with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. Quote, Secretary Rubio and Foreign Minister Lavrov has had a productive call, said a White House official granted anonymity to discuss the plans. Therefore, an additional in-person meeting between the Secretary and Foreign Minister is not necessary, and there are no plans for President Trump to meet with President Putin in the immediate future, end quote. In a press conference in Moscow Tuesday, Lavrov said he informed Rubio that about Russian position, that a peace agreement must come before a ceasefire in its war with Ukraine, and nothing has changed. Yes, so this time we seemingly are moving in a fast way towards a resolution of this all, again, negotiating track discussions, because it was Marco Rubio who was put forward to lead the negotiating team from the Donald Trump side, probably one of the few more or less competent people in Trump's administration. And this is important because they were able to very quickly detect that whatever Donald Trump thought that Putin said to him was actually not true, and that Russian position has shifted not by an inch. Russia is still proposing a complete muddy peace deal rather than any kind of ceasefire. So the playbook of Russia right now is, we want to start negotiations for a peace deal before ceasefire starts. Because ceasefire is easy. Ceasefire, you just give orders for troops not to fire, and then the opposing force also gives orders not to fire as well, and voila, you have a ceasefire. But a peace deal can go on for like months and months and months and months. And Putin, obviously, in Russia is looking at this as a leverage where they can enter this negotiating track and, again, muddy the waters. So the news about the Belarusian regime trying to propose something and getting Trump's administration on board for this negotiation process, very much in quotes, this is all part of the same Kremlin game. United States are ready to replace Russian oil and gas for the European nations, Zelensky states. The United States is prepared to supply European countries with as much gas and oil as is needed to replace Europe's dependence on Russian energy imports, President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed in his evening address on October 19th. There should be zero Russian energy resources in Europe, and the signals from America are clear now. They are ready to supply Europe with as much gas and oil as it needed to replace Russian supplies, Zelensky said. On October 8, EU ambassadors agreed on a plan to phase out Russian gas and oil by 2028. Despite opposition from Hungary and Slovakia, who rely heavily on Russian energy imports. The draft legislation was initially set to be put to a vote during a meeting scheduled for October 20th. And now we already know that it was accepted And indeed, we will see the reduction of oil and gas dependence of Europe and ultimate ending of it by the 2028. This goes despite the objections by Hungary and Slovakia, and primarily this jab that President Zelensky has been stating here about the supplies of energy resources from US. The only audience this was done for is to put pressure on Hungary and Slovakia. Recently, new Syrian leader flew to Moscow to talk diplomacy and what is the state of relationships between Russia and Syria. It has been discussed that potentially he could ask for return of some of the Russian bases when the economic connections could be reestablished with Russia, as well as Bashar al-Assad extradited to Syria to answer for his crimes. Russia has not reached an agreement with Syria regarding the fate of its military bases. Syria does not rule out signing agreements, but only on a mutually beneficial basis. During the visit of Syrian President al-Shara to Moscow, the Syrian and Russian sides discussed the fate of former President Bashar al-Assad and the return of Syrian military personnel who had left the country, as well as the future relationship and prospects for cooperation. However, no consensus was reached, including on the issue of Russian military bases in Syria. In 2017, Russia and the Assad regime signed an agreement to station Russian bases in Syria for a period of 49 years. However, agreements signed by the former regime have been suspended as they no longer serve the interest of the Syrian people, and no new agreements have been reached, the minister said. Al-Shara additionally noted, "We are restoring our relationship with China, which previously stood politically on the side of the former regime and used in veto power in its favor. Next month, Syria will make its first official visit to Beijing." Spain will supply Ukraine with a new batch of generators in the eve of coming winter. José Manuel Alvarez has announced that in the coming days, a new batch of generators will be sent through Spanish Agency for International Development Cooperation to help Ukraine survive the winter and a wave of Russian attacks against Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Quote, "On the eve of the new winter, it is necessary to ensure the stability and operability of the electric system. The Spanish Cooperation Agency has planned 70 new generators, which will be sent to Ukraine in the coming days to provide electricity and heating in this winter, which is predicted to be severe," the minister said during a media briefing before the meeting of the EU Foreign Affairs Council in Luxembourg on Monday. Thank you so much to government and people of Spain for support to Ukraine. Ukrainians are continuing their fight against a Russian network of spies and traitors. The security service of Ukraine, together with the national police, has exposed 8 pro-Russian collaborators who organized neo-communist cells aimed at destabilizing the socio-political situation in Ukraine. The investigation established that the individuals were instructed to set up regional groups of Soviet sympathizers and use cells to incite unrest at the local level. The group operated under the guidance of a lecturer from a naval academy in St. Petersburg. And once again, this is very important for us all to recognize, especially with some of the recent news, that Russian budget for propaganda is set to increase significantly next year. Ukrainian parliament has passed a law that appends defense budget for the next year, increasing the spending towards the armed forces by some 328.7 billion hryvnia, which is about $8 billion. According to the document, the largest allocations will go to the armed forces of Ukraine, 210.9 billion hryvnias, for the production and procurement of weapons and ammunition for the armed forces of Ukraine, 99.1 billion hryvnias, and to the National Guard, 8.1 billion hryvnias. It is a very well expected increase, and my hopes are that a lot of this money will go towards increasing the salaries for the members of the Ukrainian armed forces. Let's move to Ukrainian kinetic sanctions on Russia. In the village of Gwardieyske in temporary occupied Crimea, the Eitan oil depot, which was attacked by Ukrainian drones on October 17th, ignited with a new force. It is stated that the oil base in the village of Gwardieyske burned up with a new force. Yesterday at lunch, it was smoking a little. The burning tank was watered by 3 fire trucks. This morning, the burning is much more intense. A large plume of smoke is observed. So despite all of the best effort of the occupation authorities to stop the fires, it only got worse. One of the Russia's largest oil refinery in Novokuybышevsk shut down after Ukrainian drone strike. According to the agency sources, fuel production at the facility has halted as early as October 19th. In particular, the CDU-11 primary oil processing unit with a capacity of 18.9 metric tons per day has been shut down. Another key unit, CDU-9, has halted earlier on Sunday. The refinery was previously suspended primary processing following a drone attack last month. In 2024, the Novokuybышevsk oil refinery processed 5.7 million tons of crude oil. Then there is gas processing plant in Russia's Orenburg is on fire again. A fire has broken out at a local processing plant in city of Orenburg. This was reported by October 20th by local residents on social media. The Astra analytical community also confirmed the incident by geolocating the published footage. The video shows flames on the territory of the enterprise. At the same time, and this is the most hilarious part, at the same time, the Regional Ministry of Emergency Situations of the Russian Federation stated that there was no fire. Local media outlets, including RIA Novosti on 20th of October, quoted officials as calling the reports false. Well, I mean, you see the videos yourself. And finally, I want to leave you with something that hopefully will put a smile on your face. It is something I got hooked on over the last week and I couldn't stop listening. So this is the Colombian and Venezuelan band Los Iankovers, who are singing in Ukrainian songs and are promoting the fight that Ukrainians are having. And one of the things they're doing is they're going online and either meeting some toxic and very salty Russians and singing Ukrainian songs to them, or meeting some Ukrainians and cheering them up with a nice Ukrainian song. So I'll leave you with them. Please follow the links to their media that I will leave below. Trust in Ukrainian armed forces. Support Ukrainian armed forces. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.
Hello. How are you? Where are you from?
Russia.
We are from Colombia. We make some music.
Давай, пошел.
Where exactly are you from? Which city?
Давай играй нахуй, хули пиздец.
Let's do some music. Vamos allá.
Давай.
Yes.
Батько наш Бандера, Україна мати, ми за Україну